The Mario series has more than its fair share of spin-offs, giving all of the characters we love their own games to take a starring role. Luigi, Wario, Princess Peach, Captain Toad, Waluigi... No, not you! Get out of here! Anyway, one of the most recognizable and celebrated spin-off series has to be the Yoshi games. But the question is, how do they stack up? I'm Keefy with One Up Binge, and this is Every Yoshi Game, worst to best. Let's flutter jump into our list and start at the bottom with the worst Yoshi game before working our way up to the best. We're starting off with one of the more experimental games in the series, that being Yoshi Topsy-Turvy, known outside of North America as Yoshi's Universal Gravitation. Released for the Game Boy Advance, Yoshi Topsy-Turvy is not your traditional release, as the cartridge itself comes with a built-in tilt sensor which is used to play the game itself. Essentially, rather than using the D-pad to control the titular dinosaur, the player tilts the Game Boy Advance to move the environment, causing Yoshi to move in multiple directions. Generally speaking, we'd say the Yoshi games have a pretty good track record, so while we're placing this one at the bottom of the list, we will admit that Yoshi Topsy-Turvy isn't exactly a terrible game. Even so, reviewers at the time were quick to criticize the experience for its mediocre graphics and boring gameplay.
Boring.
Often citing WarioWare Twisted, which released a few months prior, as a game which uses a tilt sensor in a much more fitting manner. Topsy-Turvy wasn't the only Yoshi handheld game to experiment with controls, as the same could also be said for Yoshi Touch Go, or Catch, Touch, Yoshi if you live in Japan. Released on the Nintendo DS, Yoshi Touch Go is another game where the player controls Yoshi indirectly as the dinosaur walks automatically to the right. While he's doing that, the DS stylus is used to draw cloud paths for Yoshi to walk on, as well as tapping on the screen to shoot eggs and circling enemies to defeat them. Being a very early game in the Nintendo DS's lifespan, Yoshi Touch Go clearly tried to utilize the touchscreen compatibility as much as possible to experiment with what could be possible with future games. It got a lot of positive reviews at the time, and certainly is a fun experience, featuring several different modes, multiplayer versus, mini-games, and wonderful graphics and sound. The reason it's ranking somewhat low on this list, though, is because the core game lacked depth and thus got repetitive very quickly, not giving much of a reason to revisit Yoshi Touch Go after the Nintendo DS started to garner a more robust library with more elaborate titles. Now we finally get to the first game on the list we consider to be a traditional Yoshi platformer, that being Yoshi's New Island for the Nintendo 3DS. A sequel to Yoshi's Island and supposed prequel to Yoshi's Island DS, Yoshi's New Island featured the titular dinosaur teaming up with Baby Mario once again to rescue Baby Luigi, once again from Comic and Baby Bowser, once again. Can you take a guess as to what our grievance with this game is yet? Despite its title, this game seemingly goes out of its way to include absolutely nothing new in any way, shape, or form. A criticism which ironically has also befallen the new Super Mario Bros. Games, which clearly inspired this game's title. While previous Yoshi games had often been divisive for not quite living up to the high bar set by the SNES original, most of them at least had their own unique identity in some way, shape, or form. Yoshi's New Island has no such distinction, and while the game has decent levels and is in no way bad, it's all so bland and uninspired, making for one of the most forgettable games in the series.
I don't remember, Ben. I don't remember.
For as forgettable as Yoshi's New Island is, it's arguably not as forgotten as Yoshi's Safari. In what will possibly always remain Mario's only first-person shooter, Yoshi's Safari sees the player riding on the green dinosaur's back while gunning down waves of enemies. This is one of the few Super Nintendo games to make use of the system's Super Scope accessory, which unfortunately did no favors to the game itself. It reviewed well, but Yoshi's Safari was a commercial failure due to the Super Scope not being the smash hit Nintendo wanted it to be, to say the least. We personally do think Yoshi's Safari is a really good and underrated game, but we are docking it a few points due to the Super Scope being such an awkward contraption to handle. We personally think the game would have been much more fun if it were compatible with the SNES mouse, or better yet, with the Wii Remote on Virtual Console. Unfortunately, the game never saw a re-release, likely from Nintendo not wanting to associate Mario with firearms again, unless they're shooting rabbits, I guess. Now back to a traditional platformer with Yoshi's Story for the Nintendo 64. Being the first Yoshi platformer that came after the release of Yoshi's Island, Yoshi's Story had a lot to live up to, and while we wouldn't say that the game reached the heights many expected, we do think there's a lot to appreciate about it. Yoshi's Story was one of the first games to really popularize the use of what would be known as 2.5D platformers, which are essentially games with 3D rendered characters that still feel like traditional side-scrolling platformers. On top of that, Yoshi's Story features amazing graphics, great controls, and took an ambitious route by having the player focus on eating as much fruit as possible rather than making it to the end of the level. It also got rid of the incessant crying of Baby Mario, for which we'll give it credit. At the same time, many cite the game's low difficulty as its biggest issue, as well as the fact that it only takes 6 levels to beat. In reality, there are many more levels to get through in Yoshi's Story, but they cannot be unlocked until subsequent playthroughs, giving the illusion that there's much less content here than there actually is. If all 28 levels were accessible from the first playthrough, we think Yoshi's Story wouldn't have given the impression that it was so shallow, but even then, the overall low difficulty of the game still acts as a hindrance to what could have been a more diverse and challenging experience. Next up, we have Yoshi's first game, which oddly enough is a puzzle game, that being the simply titled Yoshi, or Mario and Yoshi if you live in PAL regions. A falling block game that released on the NES and Game Boy, Yoshi is essentially the Mario universe's answer to Tetris. Well, first answer to Tetris. More on that later. In this game, the player controls Mario, or Luigi in multiplayer, swapping 4 columns of enemies around with the objective of either matching them up or capturing them in Yoshi eggs. If the stacks of enemies reach the top of the screen, then the game is over. Very similar to, well, you know. Yoshi is definitely a fun puzzle game that's distinct enough despite obvious Tetris comparisons, so we really don't have much in terms of complaints. We are ranking it in the middle of the list though, as we feel subsequent puzzle games featuring the Yoshi character simply offered more in terms of their gameplay. Speaking of which, let's talk about Yoshi's puzzle game follow-up, Yoshi's Cookie for the NES, SNES, and Game Boy. While Yoshi's first game took obvious nods from Tetris, Yoshi's second game much more resembled a virtual Rubik's Cube in style. Here, the player is tasked with lining up different cookies to clear different rows to move on to the next round. The base game contains both a single-player action mode and multiplayer versus, while the Super Nintendo update contains a puzzle mode and an option for the player to play against a computer in single-player versus. Like many puzzle games, it's a very simple concept, but it can lead to hours of fun with its highly addictive gameplay and learning curve that encourages the player to improve. Even with all that said, we still wouldn't consider it the best puzzle game in the Yoshi series overall. Before we get to that though, let's jump back into platformer territory with Yoshi's Island DS. Reuniting the multicolored dinosaurs with Baby Mario, Yoshi's Island DS was a direct follow-up to the Super Nintendo original, until Yoshi's New Island squeezed between the two in the timeline, making this a direct follow-up to the later game. While Baby Mario is indeed present in this game, this title also introduces an onslaught of new infants to team up with Yoshi, including Baby Peach, Baby Donkey Kong, and even Baby Wario, all of whom serve different purposes throughout the adventure. This, at the very least, gave the game a little bit of distinction between its predecessor, which is much more than we can say for Yoshi's New Island. All of the babies are fun, except for maybe Baby Wario, who is barely playable until the end of the game. And while we do think it's a very solid platformer overall, it does have some issues, particularly with the gap between the two DS screens being a little disorienting and a sharp difficulty curve. Ironically, Yoshi's Island DS has the opposite problem as Yoshi's Story, as some later levels of the game can be too frustrating for their own good. Even so, the beautiful graphics, tight controls, and mostly entertaining level design make this a fun entry in the series nonetheless. One game we certainly wouldn't classify as difficult in any way though is Yoshi's Woolly World. Released for the Wii U and later for the 3DS under the alternate title Poochie and Yoshi's Woolly World, this game sees the dinosaur once again without Baby Mario navigating through a plethora of different environments. The game acts as both a spiritual successor to Yoshi's Story, being the first traditional Yoshi platformer on a console since the Nintendo 64, as well as the first one without a baby, as well as a follow-up to Kirby's Epic Yarn, which was the first game to use the yarn aesthetic which inspired this title. As such, you could rightfully criticize the game for not trying anything new and merely combining familiar gameplay with an aesthetic style from another series, but even so, Yoshi's Woolly World makes for a fun, albeit very easy playthrough, and the yarn style does work well for this universe. With that said, we do feel Yoshi's Crafted World offered the more overall refined experience, which is why we're ranking it slightly higher and giving it the bronze medal. Dropping the yarn aesthetic, but using the same formula as its predecessor, Yoshi's Crafted World is somewhat surprisingly not just a Wii U port, but a brand new platformer created for the Switch. While technically a different game for sure, every praise and criticism you could give to Yoshi's Woolly World also applies to this game. Yoshi's Crafted World is fun, colorful, has beautiful presentation, and a lot of great level design, but also, unsurprisingly, suffers from being a little too easy for many people. The game this time around also feels like less of an excuse to sell Yoshi amiibos, so we'll give Crafted World credit in that regard too. As of this writing, Yoshi's Crafted World is the most recent game in the Yoshi series, and its overall quality tells us there's more life left in the series yet. The silver medal has to go to Yoshi's best and most groundbreaking puzzle game, that being Tetris Attack for the Super Nintendo and Game Boy. In Japan, this game was known as Panel de Pon, but to make it more accessible to international players, Nintendo decided to rebrand it. Thus, the North American release got a Doki Doki Panic style overhaul by including characters from the Yoshi series and including the much more recognizable Tetris in the game's title. While the game doesn't necessarily play like Tetris, Tetris Attack is considered by many to be one of, if not the best puzzle games for the Super Nintendo, and and for good reason. It's really fun and addictive. The objective of the game is to line up several different tiles of the same color/shape, but with the added stress of the blocks stacking to the top of the screen, kind of making it a cross between the aforementioned Yoshi and Yoshi's Cookie, but even more satisfying than both of those titles. This was the start of the Panel de Pon series, which we came to know as Puzzle League in the West, with later titles featuring characters from other series like Pokemon and Animal Crossing. Even if it wasn't originally a Yoshi game in Japan, the influence that Tetris Attack has shown, as well as incredibly fun gameplay, make it an easy choice for our number 2 spot. However, it still wasn't nearly as easy of a choice as our number 1 spot. Say it with us now. The gold medal for best Yoshi game is easily going to Super Mario World 2 Yoshi's Island. Oh yeah, you saw this coming, but how dare you say otherwise? After Yoshi gained a lot of attention with the release of Super Mario World, many were clamoring for the character to get a game of his own, and after a few dabbles in the puzzle genre, he finally got his own platformer with Yoshi's Island.
Now you'll finally see!
Featuring beautiful graphics, amazing music, perfect controls, and level design, many people consider Yoshi's Island to not only be the best game in the spin-off series, but one of the greatest platformers of all time. Even just comparing it to other Super Nintendo games, that's quite the statement considering the console hosts some of the world's best platformers of all time, like the Donkey Kong Country series or original Super Mario World. The fact that Yoshi's Island is considered to be just as good, if not better, than those titles should tell you all you need to know about the game's overall quality. If anything, Yoshi's Island is so good that it may have unintentionally caused subsequent Yoshi games to suffer by comparison. Plenty of the games on this list are certainly worth playing, but none of them quite reach the standard set by Yoshi's first platforming adventure. This is definitely a case where we feel they got the formula perfect the first time, which is why it easily nabs the gold medal on our countdown. I just had to do it.